Hi everyone, welcome to a new installment of our department's research seminar. This is the Department for Theoretical Philosophy at the University of Bucharest, and the research seminar is held jointly with CELFIS. This is the Center for the Logic, Philosophy and History of Science at the University of Bucharest. We're very glad to be able to host the speaker series, given the fact that we're supported by WIFISCB, the local funding agency for research, and the project by which this occurs is PN-3 Roman-P1-1.1-BD-2019-0535. Once again, we're very grateful to our public sponsor for research. And tonight we have a special guest. This is Dan Zeman from the University of Warsaw. And he will be speaking to us about slurs and the lexicon, meaning variation as polysemy resolution. Dan, thanks so much for being with us, and take it away.
Great, thank you, Andre. Thank you all of you for being here. So I'm going to talk about slurs. Slurs are, as I'm sure all of you know, are important in a number of kind of aspects. First of all, they connect to broadly social phenomena like oppression, dehumanization, all kinds of social dynamics, as it were, power relations, and so on and so forth. So that's one kind of issue that people talk about in relation to slurs. My talk is going to be a little bit more restricted in the sense that I'm going to just limit myself to the semantic side of things. So in semantics as well, slurs have attracted a lot of attention. Many people have started working on slurs, and I think many people find them interesting because they pose kind of like a challenge for kind of traditional truth conditional semantic theories. And I'm gonna kind of follow these people when they talk about slurs from a semantic or even pragmatic perspective. And what I want to offer today is kind of a semantic theory of slurs that I think is nice and interesting. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now. Let me see. All good? People seeing this? Okay.
Yep.
All right, cool. So sadly, in a way, I mean, I'm happy, but the research in this paper has been, the research that I'm going to present here has already been published. So I'm going to try to kind of offer you, I don't know, maybe kind of like side issues that haven't been addressed in the paper. And I think what's basically new in this presentation is a comparison with a similar view in the market. But I guess I will need to introduce the issue a little bit and present the view that I like, and then maybe a lot of issues that I won't present will come up in discussion. I'm really happy to address those. So what you're gonna see here is basically kind of a sketch of the paper that has been published. But as I said, I'm happy to address any issues that you might have. Also, apologies to people who have seen versions of this talk. I think there are at least a couple in the audience. Finally, I want to say that so this is a talk about slurs. It's really difficult to give a talk about slurs without mentioning slurs. So I'm going to mention at least one, which is the Romanian slur Tigan. And I apologize in advance if somebody takes offense in that. So here are the aims of my paper today, of my presentation today. So I want to introduce a piece of data that I found actually that, or maybe I shouldn't tell the story how I get to this data, but it has to do with Bucharest. That there was a short research stage that I had in Bucharest in 2016, also sponsored by the agency that Andre mentioned at the beginning. And so that allowed me to get in touch with several activists, Roma activists, and talk with them about the data that I'm going to present. It's been a fascinating experience. So to go back to the slide, so I want to introduce this data that I argue illustrate a genuine sui generis use of slurs that should be taken into consideration by various theories in the debate. So a different type of use of slurs. Okay, I'm gonna tell you what the other types of uses of slurs are. Second, I want to sketch this view that accounts a view that I like that accounts for this type of use together with all the other or most of the other known types of use. And then in the end, compare it with similar views. And finally, kind of like a general aim, show that the focus on lexical semantics is beneficial for the theory of slurs. As philosophers like to say, bringing together two literatures. On one hand, the philosophical literature on slurs, and then the other hand, the huge literature on lexical semantics, which is a field in itself, and I'm only kind of beginning to get into it. There are lots of interesting issues there. So it's kind of connecting two things together and see. I think usually that kind of is worthwhile doing and has a lot of theoretical benefits. Okay. And a bit more concretely, the plan is the following. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about slurs, the main characteristics and types of uses. Then I'm going to present this data related to the Romanian slur Tigan. Then I'm going to present this view, which it's a rich lexicon theory of nouns and its application to slurs. And then finally, the quick comparison of other rich lexicon views. All right. So, and as I'm sure you know, slurring is a really pervasive phenomenon. Slurs are found in many of the world's languages, and people slur on the basis of, any kind of just whatever kind of characteristic that people have. There's been a slur for that, right? So slurs appear on the basis of race, sexual orientation, gender, nationality, ethnicity, disability, political views, character, personality, physical and psychological traits, and so on and so forth. And so it's a very, very common, sadly, phenomenon. Now, there's been a lot of definitions of slurs. I mean, I'm not sure if this counts as a definition, but like kind of a characterization of slurs based on their function in a way. And what I have here on the slide comes from Robin Jeshen. I think this quote kind of nicely encapsulates what most people think about slurs, about their function and so on and so forth. So she says this: slurs function to derogate or dehumanize. They function to signal that the targets are unworthy or equal standing, or are unworthy of equal standing or full respect as persons, that they are inferior persons. Okay, and right. So you don't have to necessarily think that it's always about derogating and dehumanizing and thinking of everybody else, thinking of the target as inferior as person. But the sentiment, it's towards that kind of, that's the direction you're going when you're slurring. And they target both groups and individuals via group membership. So as I said in the beginning, slurs have been taken to be very interesting for the philosophy of language. And why is that? Well, I take it that most people think that slurs have at least two aspects. Okay, one is the truth condition aspect. They refer to a particular group. When I'm saying about somebody, I'm predicating a slur. I'm saying that person is part of a particular group. But also they have an expressive or evaluative aspect. They convey a negative attitude towards it. They convey a negative attitude towards or an evaluation of the members of the group because of their being members of the group. Okay, so not any slur applies to any random person. Okay, applies in the sense that the people who slur, you can't just like use any slur for. They have to take the person slurred has to belong to a certain group that is perceived by the slurrer as having certain negative characteristics. We're gonna see that in more detail. And so the main issue for a theory of slurs is how to capture the derogatory character. Okay. Here are some essential features of slurs that people have kind of distilled from the very heterogeneous kind of behavior that slurs have been observed to have in various languages. I'm not going to list all of the features that people talk about, but I'm going to list these three. So the first is what Potts has called one of the first people who get seriously into slurs and provide like a super nice theoretical framework for that. So the first essential feature is non-displaceability, which basically means that the derogatory character doesn't disappear when embedded under various linguistic constructions, okay? And this can be seen easily even with negation. If I'm saying, so if S is a slur, I'm saying, Andre is an S, and then somebody reacts and says, no, Andre is not an S. I mean, you're still kind of derogating Andre, because you're still using the slur, even if you negate the sentence in I said, okay? Or even in constructions like conditionals, if Andre is an S, then we shouldn't invite him for dinner or something. Even if you're not like actually making a straightforward assertion, you are derogating Andre by simply using the slur. Another feature of slurs, I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to be interrupted if people want. So if there's like questions that they have, and not objections, I'm going to deal with objections at the end. But if you have an issue, just let me know. Except that I can't see you at the moment, so you have to speak up or tell Andre or something. So the second essential feature of slurs is derogatory variability. Basically, that's the idea that certain slurs are more derogatory than others. So usually slurs that have lost their currency in a way, take the German Bosch. Bosch has been used by people opposed to Germany in the First World War to name Germans or German soldiers and so on and so forth. That supposedly is not so. It's not so. Doesn't have such a such a bite than, let's say, Kraut or something like that. Sorry about using Kraut. And so that's, and again, that's like these two slurs that I just mentioned, they refer to the same group, but there's also kind of variability between slurs that differ to different groups. Okay, and I'm not gonna go on and give examples, but I'm sure you can think of examples by yourself. And then so finally, independence, which basically is the most important feature that I'm gonna rely on here in this talk, also called derogatory autonomy. The derogatory character doesn't solely depend on the intentions, beliefs, or attitudes of speakers. Okay, so it's not, it doesn't really matter whether you have a bad attitude towards a certain group when you use or utter a slur. The derogation has been produced in a way, and it's also important to distinguish derogation from offense, because you might, somebody who gets slurred in a certain context by somebody might not be offended, but still, there's some derogatory thing happening there by mere use of the slur. And so this has been called independence. It's, of course, not everybody agrees that that's a crucial or essential feature of slurs. For my part, I will take this to be non-negotiable. Non-negotiable. So first and foremost, I want that my theory or theories of slurs to account for this feature. Okay. And so finally, to end this introduction, types of uses of slurs. Well, I mean, I guess it depends on how you categorize these uses, but there are basically two main categories: derogatory, also called weapon uses, and non-derogatory, non-weapon uses. The first category is basically characterized by the quote from Jeshen that I gave you in the beginning. These are the closest to fulfilling the main functions of slurs, as I said. And you when you just want to hurt someone in this way with slurs, you just say things like John is a Bosch, or you're a Bosch, or you Bosch. Okay, that's the kind of core use that slurs have. There's an interesting question whether internalized uses are derogatory or not. Many people talk about applying slurs to yourself. I'm a Bosch, or so on and so forth. I'm not going to talk about that. It's not clear that they are like a specific different kind of use, or just like derogatory use with a with a little twist that it's yourself that they're applying the slurs to. I think more interesting and more present in the literature today are the non-derogatory uses of slurs. So by far the most talked about is what I call appropriated use, also called reclaimed uses or reappropriated. These are basically uses of slurs whose main purpose is to turn a negative connotation to a positive one. Okay, so an example that people usually cite is queer. Nowadays, presumably, it has been so devoid of negativity that you have even names of journals like Queer Studies, and all kinds of things that are queer. Recently, though, I've seen an article, I don't remember where, but somebody was kind of complaining that is not entirely true. So people take queer to be completely devoid of negative connotation, but it's not really. So things are still kind of moving here. A bit more importantly, there are many subtypes of appropriated uses, among which there are the following two, which I'm going to discuss. So appropriation as political activism, and appropriation as camaraderie or endearment or something like that. So political activism is when you purposely, consciously, it's part of your activism to overthrow a certain attitude or a certain structure or whatever societal arrangement that you want to resemanticize, basically this word that has been used to put you down, or so on and so forth. And I'm sure you know a lot of cases. And the other kind of appropriated use is when you use these terms as part of your like close relationship with somebody, or as a term of endearment, and so on and so forth. Regarding the N-word, there's I think a wonderful short essay by Gloria Naylor, in which she talks about the many uses of the N-word in both derogatory and appropriated. And I mean, it's really fascinating read, which can see how flexible this term is, and those terms are actually. But so just to stop the rambling, the philosophers have kind of focused on these two senses of appropriation: political activism, camaraderie, and endearment. Another type of non-derogatory use is what Lovell Anderson has called referential. Basically, this is a neutral use. Okay, he says something like that. The N-word is used to mean friend, buddy, man. Okay, so it's not that you want to purposely. I don't know how to pronounce that word. It's not that you want to, resemanticize anything. You just use it in a kind of, basically in a neutral sense. That's all there is to it, I think. And then Christopher Home has put forward what he calls the non-derogatory, non-appropriated uses of slurs, or also known as corrective uses, in which you kind of like try to say something by means of correcting some wrongs, as it were. Okay, so his example is this: institutions that treat Chinese as C-word, a slur for Chinese from the United States, are morally depraved. Okay, so you're not like saying anything about these people, using about institutions or people who kind of use or incorporate. And there are also metaphorical uses. So, so John Lennon and Yoko Ono have this song called "Woman is the N-word of the world." It's a metaphorical use, obviously based on the situation of Black people in America, which is somehow equated to the situation of women. Okay, and finally, you have didactical or quotational uses, like the ones here in this paper and all academic works, maybe in courts of law. And as with the characteristics that I showed you of slurs, these are all what the theory of slurs should account, if not for all of them, but for the most of them. Okay, and here in this paper, I'm going to focus on appropriated uses and referential uses, but mainly with the aim of putting forward this new type of use that I want to postulate. And I think that's where we are now. Okay. And so probably most of this stuff is going to be familiar for you because you're all from Romania. So, okay, Tigan, right? So presumably, if you look a little bit at the history of the word, comes from the Byzantine Greek word atinganos, which supposedly meant untouchable, dirty. So there's already some kind of negative connotation there, and it spread from there to a lot of language in Eastern Europe, but also in Western Europe. And as we all know, it targets members of the Roma community. and roughly, I guess the translation in English is gypsy. I wouldn't want to put that much emphasis of the, because gypsy in English or in the United Kingdom, let's say, may have different kind of social resonance than Tigan has in Romania. And I just want to make it clear that, so this is my kind of official view, Tigan is a slur, okay? So I keep hearing people, you talk with a lot of people and it's like, no, it's not a slur, anybody could use it and so on and so forth. And I completely disagree with that. So I think there's a widespread use as a slur. And this high profile example that I'm sure you remember when our ex-president Traian Băsescu has been recorded by accident calling a non-Roma ethnic journalist stinky gypsy, so the famous Țigancă împuțită, and was subsequently fined by the Roma National Council for Discrimination for the use of the slur. Okay, so even if you have kind of doubts about whether Țigan is a slur, I think it's enough for the purpose of this presentation to take it to be as a slur from the point of view of the law, right? Because, I mean, presumably, I don't remember the exact details of the case, but presumably the fine, Băsescu was fined for, so his fining was obviously related to using the slur or using this term, okay? However, and here I think things become a little bit more interesting. So despite the word being a slur, many Roma ethnics use Țigan to refer to themselves and to those in their communities. So they use this word to do that. And this can, interestingly, even more interesting, I think, this use can be found both in Roma communities that don't speak the Romani language. As you know, Romani is it's the language spoken by some of the Roma communities and different from Romanian and so on and so forth. So both by people who don't speak this language and people who speak that language, okay? So I'm going to give you some data which I took from the Romanian government report on minorities from 2009. It's a bit old. It will be interesting to see whether something has changed. But this is the data that I have at the moment. So that's kind of a report that has inquired into the social economic standing of members of Roma communities in Romania, and really just a few questions are about language. Okay, and here's one question that these people have been asked. So, how do you usually refer to yourself and other Roma ethnics? 66% of the people asked have said Țigan, have responded to this question with Țigan, and 30% have responded to this question with Rom. Now, another question, how do you refer to yourself and other Roma ethnics in the Romani language, okay? 22% of the people asked they said they don't speak Romani, but so presumably the others do speak Romani. Interestingly, 44% of the people who speak Romani, they responded to this question with Țigan, and only 32% with Rom, okay? So you can see that the use of Țigan is kind of prevalent even in communities of Roma ethnics that do have a different word for themselves, as it were, and their members of the community. Let me just get a little drink. And finally, I mean, this is not really part of the this just appears in my paper kind of indirectly, but I thought it's an interesting question. So how offensive do you find the word Țigan? This has been asked to, again, the same people. And if you look at the last line of this table, so the answers have been ranked from 1 to 5. 1 is absolutely not offensive, and 5 is very, very offensive. So the data show that 38.3 of the people asked have said that they don't find it offensive, and 26% have said that they find it very offensive. So it's kind of a mixed bag. But importantly, the 38%, that's a lot of there's a significant portion of people who don't take this word to be offensive. In the other two lines of the table, you can see the same kind of issue, the same kind of. So the same question was asked to Hungarian ethnics and to Jewish ethnics, and there things are a little bit different. So, but anyway, so this is the data. So what do we make of this data? Okay, so first idea that one might have, or at least a reasonable idea, is that it just exemplifies one of the non-derogatory types of use in the literature. Okay, so I gave you a few of them a few slides back. So why, maybe this data kind of illustrates those kinds of uses, and I think it's a reasonable idea, but that is ultimately false. And I'm going to go a little bit through the reasoning here. So the simplest case is with political activism. Is it an appropriated use in the political activist sense? Well, I mean, it is a clear answer here, and the answer is no. Basically, all activists for the rights of the Roma have pushed for years that Tigan is removed and replaced with Rom. Okay, and it has become the officially recognized way to refer to Roma ethnics, and of course that played a role in finding the president. Okay. So here it seems to me there's a clear no. Okay, maybe there are some fringe cases. I heard of one or two members of the parliament who are Roma ethnics, and they were kind of, saying that they would prefer Tigan to Rom, but they're that's a very, very small minority. What about appropriated uses in the sense of camaraderie or endearment? Well, I'm sure that's possible, but I fear that it's not general enough. And so first, I think that such uses apply only to other people, okay, not to oneself. It's kind of weird, I think, to use a term of endearment for yourself. Also, camaraderie presupposes that there's more than one person, and so the question in the questionnaire was, one of the questions were, how do you apply this term to yourself and other people? Okay. So second, I think the context in which the data has been gathered, namely the questionnaire, is not one in which camaraderie or endearment uses are appropriate. I mean, they might be. Some people might have. You might answer with how you call, your kind of like personal way of calling somebody when you're asked officially, how do you call that person? But I mean, I find it quite unlikely. And I think third and finally, and perhaps more importantly, there's a clear identificatory element in such uses, like an ethnic identificatory element, because of the way the questionnaire has been designed, right? You might have you might not like the questionnaire or something. That's a different issue, but it has been designed so that to capture this identificatory element, and so that element doesn't really appear with camaraderie and endearment uses. So I'm concluding that the type of uses that I presented are not appropriated uses. Okay, are they referential uses? Well, in a way, the identificatory uses are very close to referential uses because they're neutral, okay, and not positive, or they don't push for any resematization or change of attitudes or something like that. Still, they seem to me to be different. First, again, as before, these uses apply, so the referential uses apply only to other people, not to oneself, because you're supposed to address other people, whereas the question in the questionnaire was, how do you refer to yourself and other people? And again, the identificatory element that I mentioned before, that doesn't seem to appear with referential uses. Okay, so remember what Anderson said, uses of the N-word, which basically what the speaker just mean, body, man, and so on and so forth. I'm not denying that Tigan could have referential uses as well, but I don't think that's the most. It can be generalized. I don't think it can be generalized. I am open, though, as I write here, to treat both types of uses belonging to the same category, but for the moment, I'm kind of like saying they are not referential uses either. Other putative explanations. Well, in talking with the Roma activists that I mentioned, and specifically, sorry, Delia Grigore and Gelo Duminica, so they have advanced this kind of explanation. So Roma ethnics use Tigan as a captatio benevolentiae, as a conversational shortcut or a sign of being charitable towards the non-Roma ethnics they engage with, in the sense that like they don't want to bother explaining to those ignorant people why it's bad to, why they don't want to self-identify as with the word Tigan and so on and so forth. And again, I mean that seems to be the explanation for certain users of Tigan, but I don't think it is easily generalizable to all the uses that I presented you. And so I conclude here that the use illustrated by the data is better taken to be a sui generis, irreducible type of use of slurs. Basically, it's a non-derogatory type of use in which the identificatory element is essential. And for lack of a better term, I call this type identificatory. Okay. So what about this use? Well, I don't know how. I'm probably running out of time, and there's still a lot to go on. But just let me know when you want me to stop. Like, let me know 10 minutes or something before you want me to stop, Andrei. Okay.
Okay, you're just doing beautifully, just a note, okay?
Okay, cool. So now I want to move to the theoretical side. So that was the data. To me, that was very interesting and kind of intriguing. And so let's say what theories of slurs say about that. Well, turns out that not much, because they haven't taken these uses. At least they haven't been taking them as separate uses. And I mean, nobody really, as far as I know, not many people talk about this kind of uses, or actually nobody. But it seems like at the first look, it seems that these kind of uses are potentially problematic for extant theories of slurs. And the way I can show this, what I'm going to show this, is by looking at the way they have approached appropriated uses. Again, I mean, I made the point that appropriated uses and identificatory uses are different, but for some of the problems that they generate are similar. Okay, and so there are basically two broad types of theories on the market: semantic theories. Lots of people hold that in all kind of shapes and forms. It's a fascinating literature. In any case, what they have to do, they need to explain. So they have a theory worked out for the case in which you use slurs derogatorily. But what happens when when you don't use slurs derogatorily? Especially what happens when you use a term in an appropriated manner. Okay, so they have to give an explanation what happens there, because presumably the word gets a different meaning. Okay. On the other hand, pragmatic theories, these are basically theories that explain the derogatory character. So the semantic theories put the derogatory character in the semantic, as it were, and the meaning of a certain term, or in the lexical meaning, some of them in the linguistic meaning, so on and so forth. Pragmatic theories, on the other hand, they show how the derogatoriness is kind of generated by all kinds of pragmatic mechanisms that have been found in the literature, presuppositions, implicatures, metalinguistic kind of stuff, and many others. But even for those kind of theories, it's not so trivial to deal with cases of appropriation of slurs, okay? Because again, you have to do some footwork to explain why the pragmatic mechanism postulated they don't appear, or maybe they're different in these cases, and so on and so forth. And it seems to be that the same issues appear with identificatory uses. I don't want to engage with these theories. That's probably it's probably going to be a Herculean task to see how all theories deal with the appropriation. And in the case of identificatory uses, since they haven't addressed them, it's kind of I don't want to start and speculate what these theories would say. So instead, what I want to do, focus on certain answer, kind of like widespread answer to the issue of appropriation that many theories, especially the semantic ones, have produced, namely to postulate ambiguity. Okay, so this appears in Potts, in Mark Richard's book, and many other people. The most explicit, I think, is again Robin Jeshen. She says this: it is plausible that the term acquired a new meaning via the process of appropriation. On this analysis, queer became semantically ambiguous upon appropriation. Okay, so here you have it. I mean, I think this is the most explicit kind of acknowledgement that what's happening here in this explanation is ambiguity. Not all the people that mentioned distinguish between proper ambiguity, which is homonymy. You have different words that are related to, or you have kind of the same word that has different meanings. Okay, so that's an issue there. But I take it that what is meant here by Jeshen, at least, is homonymy, just basically different words in a way. I should make a parenthesis here about this is all philosophical issue about how to identify words. That's a very important issue in the philosophy of language, and I don't have time to get into that. But so maybe some of the stuff that I'm going to say will depend on what you think about those issues. But I'm just going to bracket that for now, and you can ask me Q&A. Okay, so kind of the favored way of explaining this user has been through ambiguity, and I don't like ambiguity, and I'm not alone in that. So here's one kind of consideration that has been brought against ambiguity. Taking slurs to be ambiguous leaves an important part of the process of appropriation out, okay? So Jesse Rappaport says the following: it is important to recognize that the power of appropriation comes in part from the fact that it is the same word that is being appropriated, okay? And Lynn Tyrrell very nicely expresses the same idea, saying that an appropriated slur is the same word with the same history, but with a new future, okay? So it's important that it's the same word, which you don't get in ambiguity, at least in the way I'm conceiving it. Also, I don't think ambiguity works in the context of appropriation in the political sense, because it seems to me that it just defeats its purpose. The purpose. What's the purpose of appropriation? Okay, it's a very complex question, but it seems to me that it is to make everyone use it with a positive meaning. Okay, you want to change first of all the attitudes of people, then the whatever social structures that come on top of that, as it were. But your ultimate goal is to just like cancel the negativity, take the negativity out of the slur. And the example of queer, if that's a legitimate example, kind of shows that. Okay, but if slurs are construed as ambiguous, what would the basis on which to claim that one meaning of the term is mistaken and urge everyone to replace it with another meaning? Okay, so take the case of bank. So bank is ambiguous. It's a classic case of ambiguity. You have the bank, the financial institution, then you have the bank of the river. If you don't understand, like, what could you say when somebody tells you something about bank? You're not gonna your reaction is not gonna be to ban the word. You're gonna ask him, what exactly do you mean, if it's something is unclear, okay? I don't know if that was clear, but anyway, so what my point is, in appropriation, we don't behave with slurs as we do with bank, okay? In this case, the reaction to one's apparently improper use of the term with a certain meaning can at most be a requirement to clarify that meaning, not to eradicate it, okay? So basically what I'm saying, if you take slurs to be ambiguous, you don't have a further motivation to eradicate the slur, okay? There's also what people have called the reclamation worry, namely Anderson and Lepore, Ricci, Cepolaro, and many other people, which is the following. So the mere postulation of ambiguity leaves a host of questions unanswered, such as who is allowed to use a slur in an appropriated manner, who is excluded from doing so, and why is that so? Okay. So I take this to be very important questions, obviously. But again, I don't think they fall into the purview of semantics, okay? An explanation in extra-linguistic terms based, for example, on social, moral, and political considerations would work just fine. So this is actually the view that I prefer. These questions have answers in this kind of social, moral, and political consideration. It's not a issue about the semantics. Of course, when these people put forward this reclamation worry, they were kind of thinking that, if all there is to your slurs is semantics, then you kind of there's no room for you to go to explain to have a good answer to these questions. But also, as several answers have been given to the worry, and some of them are from the standpoint of semantic theory. Okay, so it's not. So I don't think not even for semanticists have reacted to this. People who have a semantic view about slurs have reacted to the worry and have given answers. So I don't think that's an issue. So basically what I want to say is that what my worry here is not a reclamation worry. Okay, so I don't think this is a problem, but just the arguments that I given before. That's what I take to be the problem for taking slurs to be ambiguous. Okay. Now, if you move kind of on the other side of the spectrum, you have what some people call radical contextualism. Okay, so that's a view according to which the meaning of words generally, and in this case of slurs, depends in a decisive way on the intentions of speakers. That might seem fit for this kind of view, right? Because it's just about what people intend, the way the people intend to use a certain slur. That's what gives you whether the slur is derogatory or not. And as I said at the beginning, that's basically the opposite of independence. So I don't wanna keep independence. So I don't think that this kind of radical contextualism is a good fit here. Well, if ambiguity is not good and radical contextualism is not good, well, obviously the answer should be somewhere in the middle, okay? And that's what I want to propose. So I want to propose the following. I want to take slurs to be polysemous, okay? Polysemy has been studied extensively in lexical semantics. That's, as I said in the beginning, that's a independent field of study in philosophy of language and semantics. And when it comes to polysemy, there are kind of two broad families of views: rich lexicon views and thin lexical views. I'm not going to get into the debate at all here. I mean, again, it's a fascinating debate. Lots of interesting views and nuances and so on and so forth. I'm going to just take it that the rich lexicon view is more suitable for slurs. And just to have a kind of, to put some flesh on the bones, I'm going to use this view put forward by Del Pinal in the paper in 2018. What's the main idea of this paper? Well, the meaning of words can be represented by a tuple consisting in an extension and a conceptual structure. And the conceptual structure comprises a multitude of meaning dimensions, roughly kind of corresponding to the stereotypes associated with the exemplars the words apply to. Also, these multitudes of these multitudes of meaning dimensions have been called, qualia, not in the philosophy of mind sense, but in the linguistic kind of sense. Basically, units of meaning that encapsulate kind of, I don't even know how to explain those, but like the smallest units of meaning that you could have, or something like that. I'm not sure I'm explaining this rightly, but I'm talking about people like Pustayovsky and Asher and Jackendorf and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the view that I'm gesturing towards. So here's an example to show you how this works. So the conceptual structure of nouns is said by these people to comprise the following. So perceptual information about the objects referred to with a noun. So that's the perceptual dimension, okay? Information about what they are made of or their parts, that's the constitutive dimension. How they came to being or the purpose of their creation, that's the agentive dimension, and the typical function, the telic dimension, and there might be more, okay? But let's go for the sake of simplicity with these four. All right. Now take the noun book. This is how, in this kind of framework, the noun book, the lexical entry of book would be represented. Okay, I'm really bad with parentheses; they look horrible. But anyway, so that's the important bit is that the whole thing is the lexical entry for book. Okay, and then you have, as you can see, you have specified the meaning dimensions that I just told you before. So a book has a certain shape, a certain size. That's all on the perceptual side. It is, made of by a cover, by pages, and whatever else gets into books. It's a printed or a written thing. It's made to entertain or to learn from, and so on and so forth. Okay, so all these kind of units of meaning are packed into the lexical entry for book. Okay. So importantly, while the full literal meaning of a word comprises the conceptual structure with all its dimensions, okay, so I stressed this already enough, a use of a word in a particular context highlights certain dimensions to the detriment of others, okay? And in essence, this highlighting stuff is a process for selection. So, certain meaning dimensions are going to be selected from those in a certain context when the word is used, and others in different contexts. What exactly is the way of conceiving this process? I don't think it's particularly important here. I mean, for the purposes of my paper, I tried to be neutral here, but there's a lot of views about what the selection comes to. Okay, and I've given you a few references here. So I'm gonna use placeholders. So I'm gonna use foregrounding when a certain meaning dimension is highlighted in the context, and backgrounding when it's taken out of the spotlight. Okay, so remember these words: foregrounding and backgrounding. Now, going back to the book example, So take the sentence, this book is bound in leather. Here it seems that the constitutive dimension is foregrounded while the other dimensions are backgrounded. What is important in this context is what the book in the physical sense is made of, okay? So we're talking about the actual physical exemplar of the book, okay? And this gets represented in this kind of framework by, C here stands for context, and the bold stuff, that's the meaning dimension that gets foregrounded, okay? In a different context, you use the same noun in a different sentence. This book is informative. Here, the adjunctive dimension is foregrounded, while the other dimensions are backgrounded. What is important in this context is the content of the book and how it affects the reader. Namely, it gives it information, gives the reader information. And again, this is represented here by the bolding of the telic dimension. Sorry, yeah, I should have said the telic here, not adjunctive. Anyway, so I mean, this gets pretty complicated, as you can imagine, but this is just a sketch of how it's going to work. Now, what happens when you apply it to slurs? And I'm almost done with this part. The proposal is to apply this model of word meaning to slurs by introducing a conceptual structure associated with them. So to introduce in this conceptual structure a separate dimension of meaning, which I call evaluative. What exactly gets into that? I mean, that's a very tricky issue. I have some answer in the paper. I'm not going to elaborate on that here. But the point is that dimension is the one responsible for the slur's derogatory character. And there's been some antecedents in the literature of people postulating similar kind of dimensions and so on and so forth. Importantly, the literal meaning of slur is the rich lexical configuration that comprises all the meaning dimensions. So I'm going to repeat that until the end of the presentation, like 7 more times. Okay. So now you have this new dimension. Here's how the slur Tigan would be represented in this new kind of. I mean, this extension of the framework to slurs. So, as I told you, you have the evaluative thing there. I think it comprises negative evaluation based on stereotypes and ideologies. They also play a role. You can keep some of the stuff from the book, like perceptual. People belonging to people that fall under the noun Tigan have a certain shape, size, color, and so on and so forth, as everybody else. Constitutive, body parts, because they're people. Adjunctive, I guess, born. Telic probably makes no sense, because what's the purpose of or the end of a certain person or a group? And then I think one important bit that might, this is all speculative, of course, but I think it's interesting. It's important to capture the fact that people falling under the noun Tigan, they have a certain provenance, history, social standing, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to call that meaning dimension origin. Okay. So let's see now how this thing can be applied to our users. So when Tigan is used in a derogatory way, the evaluative dimension is foregrounded, while the other dimensions are backgrounded. Okay. Again, I represent this here with the brackets and the so C is a specific context. What is important in this context when when the slurrer uses Tigan in a derogatory way is that the evaluative dimension that flares up in a way. On the other hand, when it's an identificatory use, what happens then is that evaluative is not on the foreground. Evaluative is in the background. Whereas origin, let's say origin, I think origin is the most suitable here, is the one that kind of gets gets foregrounded, and the others get backgrounded. Okay. So you have these different uses of slurs, and the way these uses are explained, or the people using slurs in two particular ways is explained by these notions of foregrounding and background. Okay, which again, I remind you that these are just like placeholders for specific mechanism of selections that people have postulated in this literature. And of course, it would be nice to have a more kind of pinned down idea of what this, or more developed idea, or more specific idea about what these mechanisms are. But for the purposes of or at least for the stage of research that I'm in, I think that's not necessary. And just finally, quickly, so what about appropriated uses? Remember, I talked a lot about appropriated uses. I said that they have a lot of problems. They pose a lot of problems to extant theories of slurs, like identificatory uses. Well, accounting for them would give the view, I don't know what I did here, would give the view some theoretical unity, I think I wanted to say, or it makes the view economical. And the solution here, I think, is the appeal to the notion of valence. That's basically, a certain way in which you judge or evaluate something, okay, a positive or / negative evaluation. So that's gonna now, so now you're gonna, you're gonna modify a little bit the evaluative dimension, not just make it negative as it used to be before, but just endow it with a certain valence that gets a certain value in the context. Okay, so I try to express this here by saying that valence is basically a function of context, and then you get positive or negative evaluation. And of course, when you have a negative evaluation, then you use the slur derogatorily. When you have a positive evaluation, then you use it in an appropriated manner. What is important here to note is that the difference between appropriated uses and identificatory uses is that in appropriation, the evaluative dimension is still foregrounded. Okay, you're still, that the evaluation still flares up, whereas when you have the identificatory use, the evaluation is in the background, or kind of disappears in that context. I'm gonna skip this slide. How am I doing with time, Andrei?
You're doing fantastically. This is just great. Don't hurry. There's plenty of time.
Okay, so so that's basically the the sketch of the view. A lot of details to be filled in. In a way, in the paper that got published, I wanted to remain neutral, to not get lost in the details. But of course, if if this thing, if I ever get to work more on this issue, then I would probably need to go a little more in detail and dig deeper and see what exactly is happening here. Is happening there. So here are the achievements of. So here's a list of what I take myself to achieve with proposing this view. First of all, the derogatory character of slurs is captured by the view, okay, because evaluative is part of the lexical meaning of a slur, okay, even if in certain contexts that the evaluative dimension gets backgrounded, it's part of the lexical meaning. So there's no doubt that the derogatory character is captured by this view. All the main types of uses of slurs are accounted for. By the main types, I mean the appropriated uses and identificatory uses and derogatory uses. Of course, there's this other uses that I talked in the beginning. I mean, I'm not really sure how to. I mean, I haven't thought much about how to expand it to those uses. I'm kind of skeptical that you can capture all of them, like metaphorical uses. That's, or maybe it works. I mean, I don't know. That's something to be to be continued. Okay. So these are captured by the mechanisms of foregrounding and backgrounding that I mentioned. And so the view does so by avoiding both ambiguity, all right, and appeal to radical contextualism, which I take both of them to be untenable. And the kind of the bonus is that it respects independence in a way. I mean, that was the previous slide. I'm sure this is going to come up in Q&A. And finally, this connects the debate about slurs with the well-established and fruitful areas of research, which is lexicon semantics. And so, kind of like opening up, not myself, but like this kind of thread of research opens up a lot of issues that have been discussed, but not in connection to slurs. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be a fruitful exchange. Okay, and so now if I have time, let me see. Why is this not working? Okay. I'm going to offer you a quick comparison with other rich lexicon views, and then I'm going to finish. So I'm not sure if I said this, but many extant semantics, at least in particular semantic theories about slurs, are rich in the sense that they postulate at least two dimensions of meaning, a truth conditional one and an expressive or relative one. So basically the difference between these, let's call them simpler views, and my proposal is one of degree and not in nature. But here, what I have in mind and what I think is interesting to explore are these more developed theories that impose more structure on the lexical entries of slurs. Okay, so it's not, well, for this kind of theories, it's not enough to say, well, there's a true conditional stuff and there's an expressive / evaluative one, and then, you know, things happen. It's important to go into the minutia of, you know, what exactly is in the lexical entry of slurs. And as you have seen, you know, in this rich lexicon theories, there's a lot happening there. And so there's been a few views like that. Not many, but at least two. So I'm going to consider them here. First is that of Adam Croom in a series of papers a few years back. He has proposed something similar, and also Eleanor Neufeld has a really interesting and rich paper that is a bit more recent. So I'm going to go through these views, and hopefully you still have some patience, and then I'm going to conclude. So Croom's view. For Croom, slurs encode rich conceptual structures. Okay, that's the part of the rich lexicon part, right? That have their meaning dimensions. Sorry, that have as their meaning dimensions properties, both positive and negative, that the prototypical members of the target groups are taken to possess. Okay, so it's just properties. He also holds a family resemblance conception of category membership. There's no essential property that all members of the target group need to share for the slur to apply. But what is needed is basically that different members share some of the properties associated. Okay, so, you know, Wittgenstein and games and so on and so forth. Right, so these properties are ranked, okay? And this ranking is context sensitive. And he says helps in communicating with slurs. So what does this ranking mean? So, you know, some of them, let's say, are more salient in certain contexts than others. And you rank them, you know, you're ranking them by the aims of you have in communication, okay? So he says a speaker selects among the properties in question those which are suitable for a given communicative situation. And here we come to the uses, right? Because, you know, communication uses and so on and so forth. When a slur is used derogatorily, the negative properties prototypical members of the target group are taken to have are selected, okay? So he also talks about selection. On the other hand, when a slur is used appropriately or in an appropriated manner, the positive properties prototypical members of the target group are taken to have are selected. Okay, so it's not the negative ones, it's the positive ones. Or he also makes room for this kind of switching of the evaluation, but he doesn't really go into detail. Okay, so it's pretty similar to what I'm proposing. I do have some objections. I have a couple of objections to Croom. So he doesn't really. So first, he doesn't really consider. Obviously, he doesn't consider identificatory uses of slurs. But one can maybe extrapolate from what I said above, how they would be treated. Presumably, when a slur is used in that way, none of the positive or the negative properties from the list are selected, and what we're left is basically some neutral property, namely that, you know, the member of the target group the slur is predicated about is a member of the relevant group or something like that. So he makes this point in connection to the N-word and African American, and also in connection to the slur bitch and woman. So basically, he says, you know, when so he says that there are cases in which none of the positive or negative properties are selected in a context, but just this like minimum neutral kind of property. And I'm assuming that's what he would say about identificatory uses. So that's not the objection yet. Here's my first kind of worry. There might be a worry about the view being too unrestricted. The list of properties associated with a slur is open in his view, and so then this list can end up being quite substantive. Okay, and I worry a little bit about whether this has potential to create trouble when it comes to storing and computing slurs, and so maybe in this kind of this connection, so maybe, you know, a view that postulates fewer or better regimented meaning dimensions might fare better on this score. Okay, so the idea is, you know, you're not. Well, I'm not completely sure the objection works, but the idea is that, you know, you have a huge list of properties versus you have, you know, kind of list of properties types, and as it were, in my view. Remember all this dimension with the perceptual and so on and so forth. And it might be less. Obviously, it might be easier. I mean, maybe not obviously, but it might be easier from a storing and computing point of view to deal with something that is, you know, more sense and less listy. Okay, I don't know if I'm explaining this well, but hopefully you get the idea. I think more importantly, though, Croom claims that the selection of properties in a given context is based on closeness to the members of the target group, okay, and are supposed to serve only communicative purposes, okay? So he has a view, he doesn't, you know, he doesn't elaborate on what the selection is, but his only remark is this, that is based on closenesses to the members of the target group, okay? So I can select which properties I'm ranking higher, and therefore, you know, foregrounding in my sense, based on how close I am to the member of the target group that I'm talking to. Okay, and it seems to me that that's, you know, that's pretty implausible. So it seems to me there are clear cases in which the use of a slur is restricted by the linguistic material of the sentences in which it appears. So, for example, one cannot use the N-word in an appropriated manner. So you're using it in an appropriate manner, but, you know, in a sentence stating, say, the result of the census. Okay, even if the speaker is very close to the members of a target group, that would be nuts to use the, you know, the N-word. Even I'm talking about appropriated uses, not derogatory uses, obviously. But even in appropriated uses, it would be nuts to use it when you like report the results of a census. You know, there's 40% of African Americans, you know, have done this and that, and so on and so forth. It would be crazy to use the N-word. Yet, according to Croom, you should be able to use it just because you're close to the person to which you happen to talk. Okay, so I think this is a, you know, pretty substantial objection. So I'm going to leave Croom aside and move to Neufeld. Neufeld has, so she proposes an essentialist theory of slurs, essentialist in quotes, you're going to see why, according to which they are failed kind terms, okay? They have null extension, okay? So the novelty of this view is that the claim that part, sorry, the novelty view is the claim that part of the meaning dimensions of a slur is an essence that is given a causal explanatory role for the negative traits that members of the target group are perceived to have, okay? So why do, I don't know, African Americans behave in a certain way? Well, because there's this essence that kind of like bounds them to behave in a certain way. You know, the blackness, or why do gay people behave in certain ways? Well, there's this thing called, okay? And of course, no such real essences exist. They're not like, you know, the H2O or something like that, or DNA or whatever, you know, real things in the world. So since no such real essences exist, the terms fail to refer, okay? So the view differs from Croom's in taking the meaning dimension to be related in a precise and like very specific way. So you have this essence that kind of causes people falling under the slur to have negative properties, okay? So it's a really interesting and nice view. I have, again, I have a couple of objections. So Neufeld doesn't consider identificatory uses. She doesn't even consider appropriated uses of slurs. But it seems to me that accounting for those doesn't, I mean, it doesn't seem to be as straightforward in her view as it was in Croom's view, okay? In fact, I think there might be a possible problem in extending the view to such uses of slurs, okay? So again, for her, slurs encode this essence that causes, in quotes, the negative properties ascribed to the targets. Since such essences don't exist, slurs have null extension. Well, okay, slurs don't have to be null extensions when used in an appropriated or identificatory manner, okay? Because I'm saying something about something. I'm saying something about somebody, okay? It's not that, you know, I fail to refer completely to somebody. So what happens with this essence in such cases? It would be weird, I think, to claim that it simply disappears, or, you know, she doesn't have any kind of mechanisms like foregrounding, background, and so on and so forth that would help her with that. So, so I think that's a you know, potential important problem for her. Second and finally, so she, well, as I said, so she postulates this essence, right, in the lexicon of slurs, and I think that might lead to problems. So she cites a lot of psychological evidence for essences, according to which, so this literature makes essentialization a core characteristic of humans, conceptual ability. So, you know, we basically move in the world essentializing things, or essentializing stuff that we see, because that's, you know, that's helps us go ahead smoother or something like that. And so I'm thinking the following. So I wonder whether this view allows for competent users of a slur who are not committed to, or who even explicitly reject any essences. Okay, so I'm not saying that her view implies that everybody has to be aware, or, you know, explicitly held views about, explicitly held essentialist views about things. But there might be people who, you know, explicitly don't use this, don't have these views. Okay, so they're explicitly non-essentialist. So here's a case that I'm imagining. Okay, so now I'm just imagining stuff. Um, Imagine this social constructivist who thinks that race is not something people essentially possess, but it's determined by the milieu in which one grows up. They might even hold that the traits associated with a given race are not immutable, but that as a matter of statistics, the traits that most members of a certain race or group possess are negative. Okay. Now, as it happens, our social constructivist is a racist. When our racist social constructivist uses a slur, they seem to be employing it without appeal to any essence, you know, by design in a way, because they don't think there are such essences. Such racist social constructivists seem to be conceivable and possible. I mean, you know, I'm not gonna get into that. But if that's true, can Neufeld make room for them in her view? So it seems to me that she should be able to make room for this kind of this type of non-essentialist racist, and I'm not sure she can. Okay, there's also a reply that she can give, but I'm not going to go into that. In any case, and this is the final slide, I don't, you know, so I don't want to object to these views. That's not my point here. I just take it that further comparison and calibration between members of the rich-lexicon family is theoretically fruitful. So I take both Croom and Neufeld to be kind of, you know, brothers in arms. But what I do want to stress is that to account for the whole range of the data, such views need to consider identificatory use of slurs, the ones that I just presented. Yeah, I don't think I should take more time to summarize. I'm going to end here. So thank you. Thanks so much. Sorry for going over time.
No, thanks so much, Dan. This has been terrific. I'm afraid Mead doesn't have the applause button, but we very much enjoyed it. Let me just open the Q&A session, and if you have any questions, I'm sure Dan will be eager to take them. Please feel free to signal that in chat so we could form a nice and orderly queue for the questions. Is there a first question? Bogdan, please go ahead.
Those are the best.
Yes, well, firstly, thank you for your presentation, Dan, and it was very fascinating, and well, I find it very interesting. My question is, well, as I said, a very naive question because I haven't really researched the domain of the theory of slurs. I'm wondering if the concept of speaker meaning or speaker reference would help in any way in a theory of slurs, because, well, this view, this essentialist view you mentioned, Neufeld's view, well, as you explained, if there's no such thing as, let's say, blackness, and as such, it fails to refer, or something like that, or queerness fails to refer. But if we take the concept of speaker reference, the transphobe, if the transphobe uses queer or any derogatory term for trans people, well, he or she does refer to the group, let's say, because let's say we use speaker reference, and if we use speaker reference, even if there is no such property, if there is no such natural kind as queerness, let's say, the transphobe does refer by in virtue of a speaker reference, let's say. So I was just wondering, sorry for the lengthy question, I was just wondering if a speaker meaning and speaker reference feature in any way in a theory of slurs, or can help.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, this is a really good question. So I guess the short answer would be yes. I think it could help. except that, you know, people doing lexical semantics, they are really yeah, I don't. So yeah, so in lexical semantics, what you want to do, you basically you want to, you know, figure out what's the lexical entry of things, right? And then, but of course, in such a way as to also account for communication. And as far as I know, like people in lexical semantics, I don't think they. Um, so I don't think that anybody has used as such this kind of distinction between lexical meaning and speaker meaning to explain things. They always go for the type of mechanisms that I pointed to. You know, there's a lot of evidence from cognitive psychology and cognitive science of how we process this kind of dimensions and concepts and so on and so forth. So that's basically the direction they go. So I mean, I think you could, I think you can say that. To me, it sounds a little bit like cheating because you just say like, okay, now you make this distinction and you basically solve everything. Now, I mean, of course, there's still a lot of questions that remain open. So what exactly are you using this notion of speaker meaning for? Are you using it only for purposes of communication? Well, you know, there's all kind of issues there. My speaker meaning might not be your speaker meaning, and so on and so forth. How do we communicate if that's the notion that we're employing? Another question would be like, okay, what's the connection between these two? What the connection between the lexical meaning and the speaker meaning? So you have to give me an answer, and if you give me an answer, I'm afraid that, you know, if you start probing into this question and you start giving answers, you might get really close to the kind of mechanisms that you know I've just, you know, talked about. And then the idea is like, well, let's just like skip the middleman and go directly to the mechanisms. If you have the mechanism and you have like a coherent story about all this goes, then you don't need a notional speaker meaning at all. So I mean, I don't know if you're happy with this answer. That's what I would say. But of course, I mean, it's a notion that you know, lots of people have talked about, and it has some theoretical usefulness. So I'm not excluding it, but I'm kind of skeptical that it might end up doing like the heavy duty work that is needed.
Right, so you think that there's no big explanatory power to speaker reference, let's say.
Uh, I mean, it might explain some stuff, but you know, again, if if you go down the this whole of the question, what's the relation between the two? Uh, so that's an important question. If you know, not in relation to slurs, not in relation to any particular, it's an important question itself. But then you would need to give me some answers there. So you know, give me the answers, and I'm going to tell you what I think, and you know, maybe offer you an alternative answer or something like that. But if you don't give me this answer, I'm just like, oh, this is all speaker meaning. That seems a bit theoretically unsatisfactory to me. Is that okay? Cool.
Thank you, and I am happy with the answer. So
Thank you.
thanks.
All right, perfect. Happiness all around. Thanks so much, Ben. And next we have two short questions from Professor Gheorghe Ștefănov. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Andrei.
He's not happy.
Oh no, it was very interesting, but I was thinking of an example. Maybe it falls among the cases which you have dismissed. Those cases in which maybe a pragmatic theory applies better. Anyways, I just wanted to mention this example to you and see what do you think of it, because
Yeah,
also
sure.
I'm not a specialist in these matters. But so here is the example. It was, I think in English the name is Slut Walk. And
Right.
it's a series of marches all over the world. The first one in Bucharest was in 2011. There is also a bit of a difference between the English name of the march, Slatboc, and the Romanian name, Marșul Panoramelor.
Mm-hmm.
Was the Romanian name. And So slut in English, panorama in Romanian seems to be a slur. But in this case, I was at the first march. I was present. I was part of the march, and there was also use of provocative garments that is perhaps related to the name of the march. But the point in Bucharest, at least, was not to appropriate the word, to change the meaning, to turn it from a slur into a neutral word. So there was no change in the meaning of the word. Yeah, but the way in which it was used in the title. So the point was to ridicule police people who had previously used victim shaming in relation to cases of sexual harassment. So I think maybe this is an example to which a pragmatic theory applies better. But I was just curious, what do you say about it?
Yeah, no, thanks. This is a really cool example. Yeah, so I'm not sure what to say about the case. I know that there's a bit of controversy about appropriating slut and bitch. Okay, so not many people have.
There are, of course, attempts of appropriation. Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah. Right. So that's one thing. Now you're saying that the purposes of these works weren't to appropriate the word. I can see that. Yeah. And then so the idea was to kind of like, you know, make the police
shame the shamers
face
for
their
having
own.
used
Yeah.
a slur when talking about victims, right?
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. I didn't think of that actually. And like, but I mean, it's still kind of. I think one thing you can say that it's still kind of put in a purpose. It's it's put in a like it's part of a bigger purpose of changing some attitudes or changing some structures or something like that, but not necessarily through resemanticizing the word. Is that the case?
Right.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, no, this is really interesting. I don't really know what to say. This is cool. Yeah. So maybe so that's why you're saying that it works better with pragmatics, because you're basically leaving the meaning untouched, and you kind of maybe performatively use it for broader political purposes. Right. Yeah. No, that would be good explanation. Cool. Yeah.
And the second thing is, also perhaps a bit naive, because I'm not very familiar with this rich lexicon theory of nouns from Del Pinal, and I thought it's very interesting, and the way in which you presented the application of the theory to slurs was also interesting, but precisely because you are talking about slurs, my question was, okay, but why does some word which has the dimension of a negative evaluation become a slur? So what distinguishes a word which has that dimension of evaluation with a negative valence, as you said? What does distinguish something which has that and is a slur, and another word which also has that and it isn't a slur? So
so I guess the short answer will be, in the first case it's in the lexical meaning, in the second case it's, let's call it a pragmatic element or whatever you want to call it. So I think that that's the way I can think that you can make, because of, as you say, I mean, you're pointing to the fact that it's pretty widespread. Basically, any word can be used with a negative attitude, right? That's, that's, and so then why aren't they all of these words slurs? Well, I guess, I mean, from inside the theory, that's the answer that I think I can give and I should give, because it's not part of the lexical meaning. I don't know if I mean, it's, of course, that's the postulation that I'm making, but it's I don't know how to say it. It's an in certain contexts at least, mostly theoretical, it's really important whether something is part of the lexical meaning or not. And then if you make this kind of postulation, that has to be borne out, of course, and hopefully it does in this kind of theories. But that's the answer. I mean, I don't think it gets more complicated than that. Are you happy with that?
Thank you. It does clarify things for me at least.
Right.
Yeah, thank you
Cool.
very much indeed.
Thanks.
All right, thanks so much to Professor Stepanov for his questions and to Don for answering. And now I'm wondering if any of you would have some further questions. If not, I'm just going to abuse my privilege as a chair and ask the question my own. And this is very half-baked. I'm very unsure about what to say about it, but Don, here it goes. It's a very short mix and ramble, and hopefully you'll help me make sense of it. I was wondering about how the view you've put forward accommodates appropriation. In particular, it would seem that oftentimes, sometimes when a slur is appropriated by, say, the community that had previously been derogated, what had initially been a negative evaluative valence turns into a positive evaluative valence, right? This makes it seem as though it's not that your view that has that kind of rich lexicon tagged onto it is in any way hurting this, but it's not entirely clear that you need the rich lexicon view just to accommodate the appropriation bit, because it just seems that you switch from a minus to a plus on the evaluative valence bit or something. And so it would seem as though that sort of answer is independent from the rich lexical one.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
That's totally correct. Yep.
Okay, and then I wonder, this is really, I guess, what I was wondering, if you could have both. I mean, if in one and the same utterance you could express both negative and positive evaluative valence, and this is the quirky example I have, and so bear with me. There's this 1959 movie by Jean Cocteau called Au fait Eurydice. And right at the start and right at the end of the movie, Cocteau himself is walking around in this Roma camp, right? So there are people who have this bonfire, they're singing, but there's also some knives around, and there's this sense of threat or something. And so it seems as though, and Cocteau, I might be misremembering this, but if I am, please just let's pretend that things happen that way. So Cocteau does give some comments in the off to the audience, right? And he might say various negative things about the quote-unquote gypsies around him, or he might say various positive things about the quote-unquote gypsies around him. Some of the negative stuff, I guess, might be this kind of feeling of threat. Some of the positive stuff might be the feeling of freedom, of not being tied down to any one place that's characteristic of nomad communities. And so these two things seem to go together very well in Cocteau's movie. Well, in as much as you like his movie at all, but I mean, you might not. That's perfectly fine. But and so it doesn't seem as though in all cases there's this switch from negative evaluative valence to positive evaluative valence, or the other way around. Oftentimes, well, sometimes they seem not only to come together, but to somehow be intermingled, right? And so I wonder if maybe this is just a different phenomenon than the phenomenon of appropriation that you're after. Or anyway, I wonder what you think about this.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, nice example indeed. So let me just first say again about your first point. That's That's exactly the case. That's why I talked so much about the identificatory uses, because I think those are the ones that motivate looking for a different kind of theory, and that's the main motivation behind this kind of rich lexicon theory. Because basically, what happens, that can, one of the dimension basically disappears. Okay, how do you make it disappear? You have to have a mechanism in place. Whereas for the, as you said, whereas for the changing of the valence, it's not disappearing. It's just moving something. All right. Yeah. So the Cocteau example. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a different. Well, I don't think it's necessarily a different phenomenon. I also think that it should be possible, according to these theories, that you make this switch, even maybe in mid-sentence or something like that. Well, I mean, you haven't given me like a sentence, like a proper sentence to analyze, but the whole, you kind of pointing to the whole situation in a way, and that seems to be, compatible with this kind of mechanisms of selection. Okay, now the question, I mean, I think the interesting question that arises is like, what exactly are you selecting? Because here it seems that you're going a bit more fine-grained than meaning dimensions. You're going, or maybe not, or maybe the question points to the need to introduce more fine-grained, whatever the comparative is, meaning dimensions, right? So so okay, the threat aspect, that's maybe part of the stereotype that people have. Well, actually, the freedom part, that's also part of the stereotype. So yeah, so maybe the point here is that you have to kind of break up the stereotype and go a little bit in Croom's direction and go a bit more for fine-grained. So just properties, being free or being threatening or something like that. And then if you do that, I'm not sure exactly how to do it in the meaning dimensions kind of idea, but assuming you can do that, then I don't see why this should be a problem, because you're doing the same thing basically. You're foregrounding one of them, when you use the slur, let's say, in a sentence, but then maybe next sentence or in the same sentence you're foregrounding the other and backgrounding the previous one, and so on and so forth. So I think the mechanism should apply. I don't know. I don't know if you're happy with this answer, but I think, yeah. So the example is interesting because it makes me think a bit more about what exactly is it that I'm switching between, right?
Well, I suppose I also had a very quick follow-up. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
I suppose I also had this, well, sort of snarky question in mind. So sometimes, maybe, and you might tell us a bit more about this. Sometimes I guess stereotypes are represented as presuppositions that are triggered in context, but are somehow semantically or lexically driven. Right, so if Cocteau would have said, well, the French version of quote unquote, look at this gypsy camp, right, or something like that. It would be interesting if contradictory presuppositions would be triggered by one and the same utterance, right? Especially if they're evaluative ones, or what would that express? Would it express a contradiction tolerant evaluative attitude or some hyper-intentional stuff? Or, would it express the kind of uneasiness that people often feel towards strangers, both willingness to meet them and fear and shying away from? Yeah, I'm just wondering if.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, I guess I don't think it matters really much whether it's in the presupposition or not. I mean, I think the important question is here whether you can have a stereotype that is completely, in a way, coherent or something. Because it's true that there's a lot of when people talk about stereotypes in the literature slurs, they're always like negative stuff. But obviously that that's in real life that's probably not the case. Because even even for gypsy or Tigan, there's all this kind of romanticized idea of what you just said, freedom and unboundedness or whatever, easy life or whatever. So how do you combine those with the stereotype of them being threatening or lazy, and so on and so forth. So yeah, so I guess that's what the question is. That's what I'm kind of pushing this. So I think I'm going to repeat myself. I'm pushing this. I'm pushing towards the direction of breaking up the stereotype and, like, going a bit more fine-grained and maybe picking up properties. Yeah, so I mean, this is a surprise for me as well, that I'm willing to go that direction. But yeah, maybe that's what people should do, right? To make sense of this kind of cases, because it's not like, I don't know what the stereotype is, but presumably is a list of properties as well. And the important bit is that's not only negative properties, so you have to put them there somewhere. So maybe Croom in the end, has a nicer view, in the sense that some of the stuff that comes up in this connection he couldn't explain maybe a bit better than others. Yeah, so I have to think about that. Thanks. That's really interesting to think about.
Thank you, and thanks again for making something worthy of comment from my from what I remembered from Cocteau's movie. So
well, now I have to watch it, David.
Yeah. so thanks. I wonder if there are some more questions. Silence, I'm told, is itself a message, but please don't hesitate to signal that either in chat or viva voce. All right, as I give people pause, can I ask a very quick follow-up to my previous follow-up? I'm wondering, it's very nice that you seem to be going Croom's route. I was wondering if that would so you'd be differentiating different dimensions in the rich lexicon, right? And so that would eliminate the contradiction. But I was wondering if just taking the prima facie conflict at face value, it wouldn't be best left unpacked to context. And so a semantic account of slurs would not be able to deal with these sorts of cases as well as a pragmatically rich kind of account. Anyway, it's just thank you, Bogdan. Thank you for being with us. I was hoping it was another question in the chat. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, we're delighted.
You want me to reply to what you said?
Oh yeah.
I don't know if I have an answer.
Yeah.
I don't remember what was the main point.
Well,
sorry, I was distracted by Bogdan's chat.
Well, it wasn't that important anyway. It was just I'm wondering if there's always seems to be this kind of trade-off, right? It's neater somehow to be semantically explicit rather than to bury everything in the pragmatics, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously that's so. If you have a rich lexicon theory, the danger is that you're gonna end up packing a lot of stuff in your lexical entry, because you need it to account for all these uses, and there's a lot of uses, and I didn't even talk about metaphorical uses. Imagine what's happening there. So there's always a danger that you're going to end up having like a super beefy lexical entry. On the other hand, there are people, and then of course there's also the issue that all this discussion is it's situated somehow. It's not entirely clear whether it's semantics proper, or is it like semantics / pragmatics, or is it like even fully pragmatic in a sense? Because there are lexical theorists that are relevance theorists, right? Like Robin Karsten thinks that the lexical entry for a word is just basically a string of symbols, and then from then on you construct a lot of stuff, ad hoc concepts, word knowledge and context and so on and so forth. So that's fully on the pragmatic side, right? And that seems to be what you kind of like bring into the picture. And so yeah, so I don't really know. Yeah, so it's difficult. It's a difficult issue to say what exactly is the fully semantic stuff, and then what exactly is the non-semantic part. On my part, what I mean, I do wanna like the important bit. So I want my view. I think my view is a semantic view. Of course, I'm not excluding all kinds of pragmatic mechanisms that could happen. Maybe those help with metaphor or something. And also what is important is that this evaluative dimension is part of the lexical meaning. So that's important for me, right? And then from then on, and I'm a bit at a loss at the moment, you know, for the reasons that you pointed out. So it now you made me think about you know, because I put the stereotype in the evaluative part. So maybe that's not a good idea. You know, maybe the stereotype is even maybe something separate, or if you write if the Cocteau example is right, then it has to be broken up. So I don't really know, but it's it's super interesting stuff that I have to figure out. That's very useful. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Dan. And final call for wonderful questions after a wonderful talk.
If I can just add a little thing, because the theory you presented, the last theory you presented, the one of Neufeld.
Yeah, the essentialist.
Seemed to hold something interesting and important from my point of view, at least. It was something interesting and important with respect to prejudices, rather. So when someone is prejudiced against a category of people, right, the prejudice includes not only something like statistical data. You know, the Romanians are statistically speaking lazy, less punctual than other nations, and so on and so forth. The prejudice also contains some causal relation. Something like they have all the bad traits that they statistically do because they are Romanians. Their nationality is the cause which produces all those effects. So the prejudice, when someone is prejudiced, something of what Neufeld says, I think applies. But I don't know if it applies to slurs. This sort of essentialism, I think, is included in having prejudices or stereotypes, as you were talking about. And of course, there can also be positive stereotypes. But within the stereotype, there is also this assumption of a causal connection. They are very serious about work because they are Japanese. Right. But I don't know if this applies to slurs. So with respect to that, I can very well side with your critique. And I think, your thought experiment with the social constructivist, which is also a racist, makes a good point against Neufeld.
So thanks. So I mean, she talks a lot about I mean, the paper is amazing. I love the paper. It's really incredibly rich and very well written and all that, and it's in Philosophy Compass or something. She, like, you know, the background for her is so first of all, there's the literature on stereotype, you know, via Putnam and all that, right? So we all know that, blah blah blah. She connects that with studies in psychology and this kind of dehumanization studies that David Livingstone Smith has done. I mean, I don't know if that's familiar to all of you. I mean, he's a philosopher who really talks a lot about dehumanization, and I mean, his main point is that the way people dehumanize is by essentializing them. You know, you essentialize. I mean, exactly towards. I mean, in the way you were presenting prejudice and so on and so forth. So first of all, you essentialize things, and then because of that answers, there's all the negative stuff that happens, right? And she somehow puts together this kind of two literature and has a lot of empirical evidence as well. So she thinks that this essentialization effect that there's been experiments with kids, and the results are pretty clear. Kids already at like 4 or something go for racial stuff. They think like that's the essential factor in explaining people's behavior or something like that. I mean, it's kind of disturbing if you ask me.
Yeah.
So I forgot what I want to say, but I mean, this is where she comes from, and then she applies it to slurs.
Yeah.
I mean that's exactly the so how I mean, it's really hard to argue against the view because it's so kind of like well empirically supported in normal cases. And then you would say, why? Okay, yeah, sure. I mean, that's what happens with slurs as well. So that's why you have to go to all kind of like crazy scenarios, like the social constructivist racists and all that. I mean, and I guess the question you're raising is something like, well, can somebody be a racist without thinking that there's a factor somewhere, call it essence, that explains all these, all the behaviors, or the negative behavior of the people that they think fall under the slur. And I mean, I don't really. I mean, that's why I'm pushing this case in which someone is like super kind of aware of their own cognitive life and the way they form concepts. So this social contextualist knows that she really doesn't believe in essences in this case, and she has to.
Yeah. No, but
Right,
it's
yeah.
clear. I mean,
But
it's clear from when you talk about derogatory autonomy, right? Because the word which I use can function as a slur, and I can be said you've used that word as a slur, irregardless of my beliefs. I might not have that belief in a causal connection or in an essence.
Yeah, that's actually a good point.
Use the word as a slur due to derogatory autonomy.
Yeah.
It seems quite clear.
This is a good point. I'm gonna write it down and cite you on that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Okay.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Other comments, intervention?
They can be as naive as you want. Sorry.
Andrei, we're all ears.
If you're saying it can be as naive as I want.
Sure.
How should we understand this collection of aspects that the meaning of a word include? For example, you said perceptual, telic, evaluative. Where exactly are these aspects? In some kind of psychological, mental collective of the people, or should words in this case, especially slurs, be regarded as some vessels that hold within them, among other aspects, evaluative functions, something like that?
So I think the answer to your second question is yes. That's how we should think about them. I mean, there are, I don't know exactly what you mean by vessel, but they encapsulate some negative evaluation. That's the whole point of them, in a way, or at least that's how the semantic theory would explain it, would explain the derogatory character. And then connection. So in connection to where are these dimensions? Well, I mean, these are so all these theories they talk about, they're basically theories of concepts, right? So what exactly is a concept? As you surely know, this is a super hard question, and people have thought about it hard and long, and I'm not sure there's a consensus. There's definitely not a consensus about that. But I guess this is these dimensions are basically way in which concepts are represented in people's minds, in a way, right? So
people's minds in general, you mean, I guess, right?
well, in general, but also, you know, in particular individuals' minds, right? So in your mind, you have a, you know, cognitive structure. I don't know how that's realized and so on and so forth. That's a further issue that, you know, whatever.
Because I
But
find it
yeah.
interesting that Professor Moroshoiu used a little earlier the word trigger, that these slurs trigger some kind of attitudes. Well, obviously, you can notice that I'm not really used to this whole independence theory of slurs. So this was what I wanted to know. How exactly I should make sense of that? What, where the evaluation is? Who does it? Is it some kind of counterfactual or some appeal to public opinion and stereotypes? You use the word stereotypes, for example.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so it's an important question. What goes into the? I think I mentioned this I mentioned this in the talk. What goes into the evaluative dimension? And here you have basically, you know, there's maybe kind of like two extremes. On one hand, people would say, well, evaluation is just people having negative some attitudes towards stuff, right? I mean, just that seems to me it's not enough, right? Because I could have, as you know, as Gigi said before, you can have negative attitudes to, you know, towards all kinds of things that you would express using all kinds of words. Okay, so that's not going to give you the whole story. Okay, now on the other hand, it's just, you know, some descriptive evaluation stuff, you know, bad properties or something. That also kind of errs on the other direction, because, or at least errs in the sense that it doesn't connect it, as you know. I think that's what you're worrying. It doesn't connect it to the individual, to the particular people's attitudes, right? So that you have to have something somehow in between, right? I'm thinking that's how people. That's how, you know, these are the questions that people ask. And I agree that I wasn't very careful to explain what it is, partly because I don't really know. I don't have a definite answer to what exactly goes there and how exactly to weigh these elements. But what I know for sure, it cannot be just about the attitudes of people. So you have to have some evaluations that are somehow attitude independent in a sense. Okay, that doesn't mean necessarily, you know, attitude dependent from a particular person, but they have to be somehow they have to have been somehow manifested in language or in behavior or something like that, right? Because, you know, there won't be slurs if nobody would behave badly towards other people. You know what I mean? So you have to have some history of you know, bad behavior or something like that, oppression or what have you. I'm using bad behavior like in a general sense here. So there is, I mean, there is also this like collective aspect that you were mentioning before, you were alluding to, right? So that's part of it in a way. But how exactly that connects, and that, you know, that connects to stereotypes and social structure and so on and so forth. But how exactly that connects to the particular attitudes of individuals, that's, you know, it's kind of a little bit of a mystery. I don't know. So yeah, so I think I understand your worries, and I sadly don't have like very good answers to them. But so what I did is like basically packed in the evaluative dimension all these kind of aspects, which I agree that it's a bit, you know, I should have been more careful and theoretically. I mean, people talk about in the literature of slurs, they talk about, you know, what should prevail. Should the attitudes of people prevail? Should you know, a more kind of like objective in the, you know, let's call it intersubjective or whatever sense, this descriptive kind of stuff should prevail, and it's an open question. So yeah, I don't know if that makes you happy, but
It's much clearer now. Thanks.
okay. Thanks for the question.
Thanks so much. And just a very quick follow-up to Andrei's question, or maybe this might be a bit off, but I was thinking, well, maybe there's a difference between a concept and the community distributed beliefs that are tagged onto it. So maybe stereotypes don't pertain to the concept itself, but pertain to, say, what a lot of people believe about it. So we typically say, well, we don't typically say that, but some people sometimes say things like, oh, he's such a salesman, or oh, he's such a charmer, or right. So what we're doing there is sort of tapping, dipping into the community-wide beliefs or into some community-distributed beliefs without necessarily altering the concept of a charmer or of a salesman or something. These evaluative aspects of it might sort of vary more frequently than the concepts themselves. Right?
Yeah. No, I agree. Of course. Yeah. Right.
Right. So I mean, thanks so much. Such a fantastic and thought-provoking.
Yeah, thank you guys. It was really helpful. I mean, I don't know when I'm gonna go back to working on this. I plan to work more on slurs because I find them fascinating. And I just wanna. So I'm working on a project in which we wanna kind of gather work on slurs in less mainstream languages than English. And so I would appreciate any help if you know someone working on even Tigan or other slurs in Romanian or whatever other languages that I mean, it's not that we have anything in English, obviously, but most of the work has been done in English, on English slurs and so on and so forth. And there are lots of other languages in the world and lots of other societies in which there might be super interesting phenomena, like the thing with the Tigan. I don't know. And then even about that, if you have more data, if you happen to know about data that pertain to this kind of views, I would be really happy to just drop me a line and tell me this person wrote this, and go ahead and read it. Because the data from this questionnaire, I mean, I don't even know what was the real reason for doing them. I don't know what's the author's purpose and so on and so forth. So I'm not like 100% sure about everything that's in there. But yeah, I mean, that's data that I have, and it would be really nice to find out more. And so thank you so much for all this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Don, and for everybody taking a holiday, a spring break right now. I hope it's restful, and we'll come back in a couple of weeks. Thanks again, Don, and thanks to everybody in attendance. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Thank you.
Send me the
Bye.
recording. Ciao.